All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pathways to Empowered Learning, Cognitive Strategies, Metacognition, and Inclusive Practice. We're pleased to be welcoming you today from all across the province, as we've just seen as people were sharing their introductions in our chat. And before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our funder, the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. It's with their support that we're bringing you today's session. So for some housekeeping today, we will ask that during the session, you please mute your mics. But if you have any questions, don't hold on to them. Use the chat to record them, and we're going to have time throughout today's session to address them, as well as at the end. So with the boring housekeeping stuff out of the way, I am pleased to introduce you to Trish Derby. Trish is a graduate from the University of Waterloo and Queen's University, with additional qualifications in special education. She brings over 3 decades of experience as an educator, trainer, and learning strategist in diverse educational settings. Her passion for advocating for learners of all ages has been the driving force behind her extensive career in education. Now, Trish currently serves as United for Literacy's regional coordinator in Nova Scotia and as the chair of Literacy Nova Scotia as well. Her expertise lies in special education, structured reading instruction, and she provides tailored support to adult educators and literacy practitioners in Nova Scotia as well as Ontario through her organization CELTAG Education Group. With that, Trish, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Well, welcome. It's so wonderful to see so many people on here. I really appreciate your time today. I will pull up my presentation. And there we go. I'm hoping it's seen by everybody. I'm just gonna.
Yeah, looks good.
All right. So we're going to take a look today. These are the objectives that I have for it. Understanding those cognitive processes and strategies to support your learners. I'm going to touch on metacognition, UDL, scaffolding strategies, and I do have a resource guide and some other documents that will be shared with you. I should mention off the top that if you hear a really loud bang, it's ice falling off the roof as the sun hits it. Summer could hear it when we were speaking before we started. And full disclosure, I have a cat who is currently sleeping, and I hope she stays that way until we're done. But yes, she may pop in. So my objectives for this, and this is a weird looking slide now that I look at it. I want to take a look at the different cognitive skills. And this was a presentation I first did back in 2017 for those who taught adults in Nova Scotia. And I took them on a pretty deep dive. But this is based on my experience as a special ed teacher and realizing that as an adult learner instructor, I didn't have the benefit of doing a lot of the psychoeducational tests to see where they were at. But there are things that you can pick up, and I likely as I go through these, you're going to recognize things either in yourself, a family member, or a learner. And there's strategies for them, and you'll see some repetition of strategies. But all of those strategies fit nicely under the umbrella of UDL and metacognition, scaffolding, explicit instruction. They're all tied together. And my goal is that you'll see that they are tied together when we are done. I like to start off with this because I wish when I was in Teachers College, someone had shared this information with me, but I guess back in the 80s, that wasn't a thing. But this also, for me, helps tie everything in. So it's about the brain and how it's designed. And it is designed to sense and process, store, perceive, and then act on any information it gets. And those neurons, that are the building blocks of the brain, they create the networks that link everything together. It's interesting how the brain will do some pruning through a child's life so that they're better able to take on more difficult subjects as they transition into high school, that type of thing. But the focus here, the whole sense, process, store, perceive, and act, has a lot to do with those cognitive skills we're going to look at today, and also what we can do to, kind of support learners who may have a weakness or a deficit or an exceptionality in any of those areas. And it's also important that we provide a safe, structured, predictable learning environment that is part of trauma-informed teaching. And when an environment is safe and structured and predictable for the learner, then that helps them, it increases their bandwidth. So they're not scanning for, oh my gosh, what are we going to do next? Or what am I going to have to read or do? Instead, they get to be able to focus on what's coming at them and feeling comfortable about it. So back when I first became a special ed teacher, we did call them learning disabilities, and some places still do. A deficit, a weakness, an exceptionality. I often refer to it as an exceptionality. And so what they are, these deficits or exceptionalities, they're referring to conditions that might affect the acquisition, the organization, the retention, the understanding, or the use of verbal or nonverbal information, which is exactly what the brain's designed for, right? The stuff that it takes in, where it's going to store it, so that you can find it again when you need to retrieve it and act on it. And so all of these cognitive skills can be real barriers to learning for a lot of people. So they result from impairments in one or more of the processes related to the perceiving, the thinking, the remembering, or the learning. And they can vary in severity, and you've probably seen this in your practice. But we do know that at the very least, they may interfere with the acquisition and the use of one or more of the following: oral language, so listening, speaking, and understanding. And then, of course, reading, which is, the foundation that we need. So it may present as a decoding issue, phonetic knowledge, word recognition, comprehension, writing, that type of thing. It can also impact and interfere their use of social perceptions and social interaction. And I've certainly seen that a lot in my years, especially for kids that were diagnosed maybe with ADHD or executive functioning skills. Social perception, social interaction was a challenge for them. Again, it impacts written language, math, the computation, the problem solving, and organizational skills. So these are the cognitive abilities we'll take a look at today. So the oral language, slow processing speed, auditory memory, visual memory, concentration, and executive functioning skills. A lot of connections between all of them, but I will show you things individually. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how they may present, what you may see in a learner, and the importance of that skill. If you do have a deficit in that area, how does that impact someone's ability to learn? And then what we can do to support them. So it is all about how we take in information and how we put information out. That's all of us, no matter what. I think back to my study skills and what I did in university. And honestly, when I think back, I think I used to copy entire textbooks out. I wasn't smart enough to just take the important piece, but for me, having my pen in motion worked. If I was attending this session right now, I would be scribbling, probably words that I heard and drawing clouds and arrows, but that's what works for me. It's hard for me to just sit back and not have a pen going. And that's just what works well for me. And so we'll be taking a look at some of that when we talk about metacognition and scaffolding. So oral language consists of those two important components, the semantics and the syntax. They're both really important for effective thinking and communicating, right? And it's interesting because I think for most of us, we think of oral language as a communication tool, but its main function is actually for thinking. And this is important because it has long been considered the #1 predictor of school success. And when I think back to my days where I would administer the Peabody vocabulary test to students, and it could range from a grade 2 student who actually couldn't read well, but had grade 12 vocab. Didn't mean they could read those words, but they knew what they meant. Or someone who, read okay, but scored very low. So it is a really important skill to have. So under oral language, the potential impact that you may see or the struggle that may occur in your learners is that it does interfere with all areas of cognitive development, and it can result in weak thinking skills for our learners. We often see that they lack sufficient vocabulary to read with comprehension, especially after grade 3. And that's, as for the children, that's when now, they're reading to learn. And we know that that impacts our adult learners as well, because they likely struggled with reading throughout their academic career. But the beautiful thing with adults is that many of them do have a strong vocabulary base. They may not know what the word looks like on paper, but they know what it is, and they may know how to use it. I often think of a student I had in grade 12. He wanted to be a mechanic. He spent all of his spare time alongside his father, who was a mechanic, tinkering with cars, repairing cars. He could not read the word carburetor, but he could tell me what it is and how to install it and its purpose in a vehicle. And that actually is helpful to us as practitioners because they have the information behind the vocabulary. We just need to show them what the word is. We may also see this students struggle with verbal reasoning. That's tough for them. And it is sometimes connected to an auditory distractibility for some learners. So strategies that you can use to support. And again, you're not assessing for this. So I set this up as, hey, you may see this level of distraction in a learner. These are some things that you can do to help. Asking our learners to retell a question or instructions or an answer, or retelling a story or a passage that they've read or that they've listened to. The goal always is to get them thinking out loud. Show and tell, even with older ones. We did that a lot with my adult learners back in the day when you could get the free Metro paper, hard copy, and they'd pick a current event topic. And because a lot of them still listen to the news or watch the news on TV, they had vocabulary that they could assign to it. They just couldn't read about it. So we would, break down a passage about an event, a current event, and then talk about it. Some of them would practice ahead of time to do a show and tell type of thing. But the best strategy for a learner with an oral language exceptionality, or any of our learners, is get them to verbalize as much as they can. Because when they're saying things out loud, now those connections to the brain are made. And that's what we want. That's where it happens. It doesn't just happen if they write something or they read it, but if they can talk about what they've read and have an opinion and answer some questions about it, then it's great. Things start to stick. And again, this is a strategy that you can incorporate in your classroom with all your learners. Verbalizing connections. I don't know why I have 2 slides that say the same thing. I apologize for that. I will say that it did take practice and patience to get my learners comfortable into verbalizing. And I don't know the setup of your classrooms or how often you see your learners, but slowly introducing it to them and getting them used to it, and seeing that they see their peers doing it or talking to their peers about it. Even if you're showing them a video about something and getting them to talk about it, all of those things work really well for them and strengthen those connections. So slow processing speed. It's the pace at which a learner takes in information and then the brain tries to make sense of it so that the learner can respond. And it doesn't matter if it's numbers or letters or, listening to their teacher, they're processing it slowly. It is not related to anyone's IQ. It's their brain just takes time. And again, another example is I had a student who was quite bright, but couldn't keep up with my instructions. And so at first I tried this where, because I would say to them, take out your math book and turn to page 53 and we'll start at question 4. So this poor fellow was still at take out your something book. And so to help him out and not make it obvious, I would pretend that I didn't have my book with me and ask for his. And I'd say, grab your green math book. And then I'd open it up and pretend that I was looking at it and help him out that way. But there's other things that we can do that work well too. I know I've spent time with adults that I can see have a slow processing speed. And I met someone one time and I knew that they had a cold because they told me, and they were taking cold meds. And I thought that was what was slowing down her processing, because they do dull our senses. But it wasn't that, because I met her several times. And they're the people with slow processing speed are the kind of people where you might be sitting in a group, maybe around the dinner table with family at Thanksgiving, and they're always a few seconds to a minute behind if someone says something funny or tells a joke or just tells a story, and that person's just catching up. I imagine it's quite a frustrating exceptionality to have, because you're just always a little bit behind everybody. And certainly in high school today and elementary, teachers are forced to move through a lot of the curriculum, especially math, very quickly. And so for someone with a slow processing speed, it can be pretty challenging. And it's hard for them because they do feel stupid, and they're not. They just need a bit more time. So it impacts their executive functioning skills, so organization, all of that stuff. And it can definitely have that profound effect on their reading and math skills. And as I mentioned, it affects with math. So maybe depending on how something is taught, they're catching parts of it, but by the time the lesson is over, they're missing a piece. So then when we move on to the next concept, they're not there. So it is pretty tough on them. And certainly I've seen it in both children and adults, that when they're not understanding what's happening in their class, we do see their frustration and acting out. I had an adult learner like that, and we had to come up with strategies to help him deal with this frustration and, to not cause a scene in class, as would sometimes happen. And we worked it out and it got better. But it is really hard on them because they're not keeping up with the class, and they know that they're not. So you may see it in your learner. They struggle to finish a test or assignments in the expected time frame, which is really tough for them if they're writing the cake or any other kind of test, if they're already headed into, let's say, the workforce or the skilled trades. These are also learners who will struggle with listening and taking notes while you're speaking. And conversely, they could also struggle with reading and taking notes at the same time. It's difficult for them to struggle to solve math problems in their head, or completing those multi-step math problems in the allotted time is also difficult for them. If they're given more time, you're likely going to see an improvement in that now, okay, we can do this. And of course, keeping up with conversations, that's especially noticeable in group work. It's just their brain is processing it slower than the rest of us. They may struggle with written projects that require details or complex thoughts. They definitely can be overwhelmed with too much information at once. And I think that was a hard lesson for me to learn as an instructor and even as a teacher, that you just can't dump it all out at once. They might need more time to make decisions or give answers in class, and they may need to read information or a passage or text more than once for comprehension. They definitely will miss nuances in conversations because their brain is still processing the beginning of the conversation or what they're reading. That's why, humor and sarcasm doesn't fly well with them, because it may sound serious and not sarcastic or funny. So it's just a case of slowing things down. So here are some strategies that have worked well for me. The simple one is giving everybody time to process the information. So it doesn't seem like we're just doing it for Trish in the room. We just make this part of our practice. You can, build in think time into every question. And I also find that is a nice support for my adult learners in general, that they have time that, I as the instructor I'm not expecting an answer in 32 seconds. Let's think about this. And I'll touch on that when we talk about the metacognition and that kind of thing. You can go ahead and tell them, you know what? I'm going to give everybody time to think before answering this question. Showing them how to jot quick notes or sketch their thinking, annotating in books and worksheets or on the worksheet or in notebooks works well. I had a group of adult learners that strategy in particular worked so well for them. They left after a year and became readers, but they had a notebook that was worth gold to me and to them. But they got in the habit that no matter what we were working on, that book was there. They were jotting things in. I know a lot of people still, turn to Chromebooks and so on, but the truth is, if learners can write or sketch or do like me and make weirdo clouds and arrows, that's making a connection to the brain that taking notes in a laptop doesn't do. Now, for some, writing is difficult too. So obviously, your learners, I don't, but finding a place in there that will work for them. Whenever we can lessen that pressure on the learners and normalize pausing, that reduces the pressure for them to respond instantly. And considering that some of our learners may not have a slow processing speed deficit, they may just be a little bit uptight in the classroom anyhow, now that it's normal, that they don't have to answer within the first 5 seconds, that helps. And I think back to my experience in high school math, which was not my best subject. And one of my classmates, got everything right. And in fact, if she didn't get 100 on a test, she'd go to the math teacher and make it 110%. But so she would answer right away, right? Because she knew the answer before the math teacher finished asking the question. And the rest of us were always quite deflated by it because it's like, I didn't have time to figure that out. So whenever we can adjust that speed with which we're looking for answers, it really can have a nice positive impact on our learners. So checking in with them to make sure they understand the concept or the lesson or the text, whatever it is you've been working on. Check-ins are great. You can ask them to retell the story or the lesson to do a check-in. So it's not a formative assessment, but it certainly can be helpful to you as a guideline of what information they'd be missing, because they might be missing something and we may not notice it right away. Using graphs or visual aids whenever possible, breaking down the lesson or the assignment into smaller chunks, instructions into smaller chunks. I also got in the habit of, there were instructions on the whiteboard. I was talking about them and they had a document in front of them so that they had different places they could go to see, what worked well for them to get the information. And sometimes for some of the students, I would be a scribe, or I would have maybe a set of whatever we were working on. I'd already have it printed on a piece of paper for them because it just made it a bit easier and took the pressure off for them. So auditory memory, as you can probably guess what it is, the ability to remember and respond to what you have heard. And it's such an important one because most learners, whether they're, in elementary or high school or adult learners, or even those of us at work, we spend a large portion of our day listening to information, and we're expected to recall that information later. So that's a big task that we're asking of our brain. And for people with a weakness in their auditory memory, you can imagine what the impact is for them. And it makes a long day even longer for some of them. So you may see in a learner their struggle to process and then do that integration of auditory information. So they may miss information that you're sharing. Um, they may have incorrect information because of their auditory memory. Often see it as off-task behavior in the classroom. I think some adults that I worked with, they did a good job of kind of hiding that compared to kids, but it's something that exists. And typically would see high activity or frustration levels in a classroom because they probably know that they know the stuff, but they're missing pieces of it, right? And you can see the frustration with them. Through the years, we would often see these learners mislabeled as lazy or difficult. And I think back to my adult learners who talked about their academic journey, as difficult as it was, and many of them were labeled exactly this way, right? That's how they're viewed by their teacher. Um, and so these would be, people that didn't have a psychoeducational assessment done. They just knew that this was tough for them, except nobody put a name to it, really. We certainly see with an auditory memory weakness that their language development and the acquisition of basic skills can be delayed because now they're struggling with information that's been presented to them either out of context or of very little interest to them. So they can't even connect it to something because they don't know the something they need to connect it to. And they may appear very disorganized. They're the ones that would have desks that would frighten anybody, right? The stuff that was in it, and they couldn't find what they needed, or their backpack was a mess, and see it in the adults as well. So it has all of those kind of impacts on our learners. So if possible, providing a distraction-free work area, or if there's someone who can be a note taker for a learner, or as I mentioned earlier, providing that one-page cheat sheets that they can use as a reference. And I would encourage them to annotate on that cheat sheet, put stuff into their own words, or draw a picture that made sense to them. I have found over the years that my adult learners were really good at jotting stuff or sketching it so it made sense to them. Using shared Google Docs, whenever you can give both oral and written instructions. So if it's written on your whiteboard or on that cheat sheet, and then being able to speak about it. I taught my learners to highlight written directions. And we spent time learning how to highlight the important stuff, right? Because I remember when I first started using a highlighter many years ago, I would think I would highlight every word, every sentence, every paragraph. And so I would teach them, pointing out what's important. So this is what we want to highlight out of this instruction sheet. Or maybe you're doing something about the plumbing trade, and what are the key words we're looking for? Okay, let's highlight those. We'll come back to them in a minute, but let's just scan the document and look for that stuff. Whether with a yellow highlighter or drawing a circle around it, anything that will help them make that connection. Think alouds, and I'm sure you're all using think alouds. It's funny, they weren't called think alouds when I started using them, but it's a great description of them. So that's where we describe out loud any visual presentation or talk through a concept while showing it. It's explicit instruction, and it supports all of our learners, regardless of where they're at in their academic journey. And it's not always easy to do. I did an in-person workshop with adult learner practitioners about a year ago, and we had them do think alouds on something as basic as you're planning a surprise birthday party for your friend. And so we know what we would do in our head, the steps, but to actually say it out loud and do it systematically was a struggle for almost everybody in the room, partly because we know what we would do. We know we'd, make the guest list and send out the invitations and then purchase the birthday cake and all of that good stuff. But to suddenly turn that list into a think aloud took us some time, and that's quite normal. I think math and some of the reading skills are the easiest to do think alouds, for sure, because you can show how you work out a math problem step by step. So other think alouds can be where you're summarizing each concept or lesson. So we're repeating because their brains need the repetition. We want those connections to happen. During the repetition, can be some highlighting or annotating or filling their notebook with stuff that they recognize as important or stuff that we point out that is important. Diagrams and images are really helpful, but you're also going to need to describe them. Chunk and clarify long directions. And again, I'm working towards some more stuff down the road that will directly relate to your learners going into the workforce or the skilled trades, because I know for them to prepare for certain tests is a lot. So we need to teach them how to break the stuff down to look for what they need to look for to make those brain connections. So this is a good way to start training them with that, where we're chunking long directions, we're clarifying them, we're making sure that they know what it is we have to do, and we're asking them to tell us what they have to do. And then chunking those assignments into manageable pieces. So visual memory, that's, as its name says, is the ability to remember what you've just seen or read. And of course, it's an important skill because as learners, we need to notice visual details. And we need strong visual discrimination skills to be successful in math and building their reading skills. And it's also important for developing those organizational and study skills. Visual memory is important, and it's not easy for some people. So you may see in a learner, they may struggle to process and integrate visual information just when it comes at them visually. If they're just reading a document, you haven't talked about it yet or read it to them or, given them a heads up about it, they're just reading it. That may be a lot for them. They might struggle with organizing information on a page. Don't know where to start. It doesn't make sense. Now, this is where the annotating can help because they may be able to make sense of it their own way. But you will probably notice this in some learners, and that they may struggle with noticing visual details, right? So again, they're missing a piece for whatever reason. They may have difficulty copying information from a textbook or from a board. I had an adult learner, and I'd have stuff when I was trying to do writing extensions with them, and I would have, some stuff on the board that they were dictating to me, and I'd put it on the whiteboard. And she would start out copying, perfectly on the lines. But by the time she would get maybe a third of the way down of what was written, her writing started to slant. And she just kept on writing. Now, to her, that looked normal. She had no idea her writing turned on an angle. And so to help her with that, I would give her one of my cheat sheets, and so that she could copy from the piece of paper versus the board. Because for people with a visual memory deficit, they'll look at the board, and in that second it takes to write it down, they may miss pieces, right? They may miss words. So then the meaning changes if they're reading it over, that type of thing. So this may be something that you will see in a learner. So as you can imagine, they may struggle with organizing a multi-step project or a multi-step math word problem or multi-step instructions or any other project that requires many steps. As soon as, the instructions have probably more than 2 to 3 steps in it, they may miss some of them. And they may also be overwhelmed when they see a document that has, and even if the first step is read the following passage, and the second step is answer the questions below, and then the fourth one starts with the questions, that may be a lot for them to take in. Math is often a struggle for them for people with a weak visual memory, because it's a lot coming at them, and they can't keep it in there. They can't make the connections. And we do see them struggle with a lack of effective study and organizational skills. And I see this almost every day in learners who have reading difficulties. So all of these cognitive skills you can see have a lot of impact, potential impact or struggles for our learners, right? And you can see how, it doesn't matter how hard someone can work if they don't have the supports in the right place, it can still be really difficult for them. I have actually used the wider ruled paper. It worked for some. Some learners didn't want, adult learners didn't want it. What worked well was giving the oral and written directions. And I had a lot of cheat sheets with that class. But that way they get to hear me talk about it, and then they can see them. And so now there's a better chance of connections being made in the brain. And if I was giving those directions, not if, when I was giving them orally, I was breaking them down and saying things like, so what's the first step we have to do for this? Okay, so we've all agreed that's the first thing we have to do. Let's do that. And then we'll come back to the other steps. Instead of going through all the steps and hoping for the best, we would actually work through each step individually. So whenever you can summarize the lesson or the concept orally and then provide notes on it, showing them what's important of whatever it was that you were working on, uncluttered handouts, more white space, less text. And that's great because there's a lot of neurodivergent folks out there, and I can be my own worst enemy sometimes, even with my slides, and have not enough white space and too many words. But I do find that uncluttered handouts work well. I had a learner who really struggled with math in grade 5, except that she was getting it. But the teacher would give a test that was, 7 pages long with like 42 questions. And the student by page 2 would just write answers such as, I'm dumb, or I can't do this, or I don't know this. And I asked the teacher, could you, how many questions does the student need to answer to demonstrate she gets this concept? Could you put more white space? Like give her 10 questions that cover it all, 1 on each page. And she wouldn't do it. That's another story for another day. But the uncluttered handouts helped with her. That's how we practiced. That's how we studied. It's very overwhelming for these learners that when they see a whole lot on that page, that they kind of go into that, oh my gosh, I can't do this. So whenever we can, provide more white space, less text, it's better. In a classroom, reducing sorry, that sounded like a gunshot, but it wasn't. It was just ice coming off the roof. Reducing visual distractions is helpful too. More strategies for improving learning for those with a visual memory deficit. Again, using different color highlighters for the instructions. And they kind of picked out their own, key so that they could see that pink meant this and yellow meant that. And I let them do it at a way that would work for them, not that a way would work for Trish. It didn't happen overnight, but it took time to build that habit of highlighting their key words in written instructions or in text. Some of them were happy to draw a square around words, or a circle meant something different, or a squiggly line. And we just kind of trained ourselves on doing it. And I got in the habit of demonstrating that too when I had something on the board. When they can see the benefits of highlighting keywords, and that they can go through the document and then look up and see the instructions and know, okay, like they've got that support there, right? That they don't have to remember everything that I said that they had to do on that page. They can look up and go, okay, so we just have to read to this part, or, this is what Trish is asking. And then they can go back to the work, and then they can come back. And they learned that it wasn't a sign of weakness to go back to the instructions or the highlighted words or into their notebook for where they were keeping track of this stuff. It was just a really nice piece of scaffolding for them. Spacing word problems on a page, if you can, that works well. Drawing black borders around math problems, that way they're just focused on that one. Math is a difficult subject for a lot of learners of any age, and it can be quite traumatic for them because they know they're struggling in it. And when they can just see one problem and not 10 more that they have to do, then let them just focus on one at a time and get through that. Say, okay, we did well with that. Let's try another one. And then we flip the page and there's another one there. When it comes to non-numbers, blocking off text again, where we're just, going to look at the first paragraph or just the second paragraph and block it off. So whenever we can remove those visual distractions, and because when a learner can see, okay, Trisha's just asking me to read the first paragraph. Doesn't matter what comes after that. I'm just reading the first paragraph. Takes a lot of pressure off of them. It also opens up some bandwidth for them because now their brain isn't in scary mode for them. It's in, I know what I have to do. And then we'll go on to the next step. Concentration. I think we've all been on the other end of it's hard to concentrate sometimes. But it's basically the act of directing your attention to one activity. And, even from when I started this workshop in 2016, 2017, I thought the world was connected then, and we know where we're at a decade later. It's really hard, and we see this in learners of any age, right? Where they look at things on Instagram or TikTok, and it's for 5 seconds, and they're moving on, and something else catches their eye. And so it's really hard, and we're seeing a weakness in people's concentration skills because we don't need to concentrate for long. Something new, comes into our feed, no matter what platform we're on. But if it's such an important skill, because without it, now learners will struggle to integrate and connect new information to information that is already known and is sitting in the brain, ready to be retrieved. And it's hard when information is connected through a lecture or a discussion. And so concentration, when we do the tests on it, we're basically, measuring what goes on in the brain and how well can a learner manipulate new information that's already been received. When I used to administer this test, I used to be grateful that no one was doing it to me because I found it really hard. And I was always impressed at the students who had really good marks in concentration because it's not an easy thing to do in a test situation. So it's basically, the process of manipulating that new information and how we're connecting it to previously acquired information. And then having the ability to restate that information in a new way, which really describes, everything we do when we're learning something, whether we're learning, a new task in our personal life or at school. It's all about that. And it happens in the brain in the blink of an eye, unless we are someone who has a hard time making those connections and concentrating. So we may see this struggle in our learners that they're not retaining or understanding the importance of information because their brain's busy struggling to integrate it and find a place to connect it. So they may lack confidence in everything. And they may, in fact, not have an active mind. They're more of a passive mind. And because there's a lot of passive learning that's done in education, it's hard to have an active mind when it's passive learning. So when you have difficulty concentrating, the learner may generalize and transfer information poorly, right? They're not making that full-on connection between the information that's being filed in their long-term memory. They may store information in what's described as boxes in the brain instead of making that connection where it looks like a spider web. And it doesn't actually look like a spider web, but that's that connect. But it's not chunked. It's not in different places. So someone that has difficulty concentrating, they may have taken in something I've said today, and it gets stored somewhere, but it's not connecting in that sort of web-like way to where it should be. And so it's pretty hard to retrieve something that isn't connected to where it should be. Or, you teach someone, let's say, a reading skill or a math skill, and you wonder why, 2 days later when they come back to class and we're kind of reviewing it, that they have forgotten it. It's because it's not connected to where it should be, and they likely have poor concentration skills. Because again, the brain, that whole sense, process, store, perceive, and act is everything that we need the brain to do. But if we're not putting all the right pieces in, it's not going to happen for them. So strategies that we can do for someone or for the whole class, again, because it's hard to just, do individualized stuff for everybody, but opportunities for breaks. And again, that can be that whole, let's put things on pause. So we're going to, wait 30 seconds after I've asked you a question or shown you something so that then we can talk about it. We want to find a way to slow down the flow of information and learning coming at them, which is why when I described, that you look at instruction number 1 and just do that. And we've figured out that we get what we're doing with that, and we've read that paragraph. Okay, let's take a look at the next thing that we're supposed to do on this document and do that. So we're pausing after presenting a concept or asking a question. We want to pause or slow down the information coming at them. And here I am back to the whole jot notes that works so well with my learners. And again, I never looked at their books unless they wanted to show them to me, but it was more about what's going to help you remember what we're doing here, especially when it came to new concepts. And they could refer to their notebook when we were reviewing a concept. Because I'm a firm believer that real life is not, I have to memorize everything, but I can always refer to something, except when we're writing something like the cake. But, so they get used to, and they can build up their brain bank, really. Opportunities for movement. Sometimes I would do this game called Scoot, and SCOOT. And I had task cards. And it didn't matter what we were doing, whether it was we were learning some grammar or, learning about verbs or doing math or social studies. I turned them into Scoot cards, and I set them out on the table, and they had a form where they would put the answers for each one. And they liked that. We wouldn't do it every day, but sometimes I could tell when it was a heavy day, like, let's do some Scoot. And we would do that. And that would take, 10, 12, maybe sometimes 15 minutes, depending on what we were doing. And it just got them moving around the room, because I think everybody needs to move around the room once in a while. Chunking, again, also helps them make those attachments and connections, right? Little pieces, little chunks. I imagine you are likely doing a lot of these strategies already. Removing, again, that any unnecessary clutter in their work area. I was very lucky with my class. We sat at a giant boardroom table with delightful chairs. And so we had lots of space for people to have their notebook and do their stuff. And there wasn't a lot of clutter around the room. So any, visual clutter is a big help as well, because we want to help them concentrate. So executive function skills, those mental skills that help us to get things done, they are controlled in the brain by the frontal lobe, which is unfortunately the area impacted by trauma. And so that's why we often see people, children, adults who have cumulative effects of having been impacted by trauma, that their executive function skills aren't going well, partly because part of that impact is that the learner, the brain is now very hypervigilant. It's looking for threats, and it doesn't necessarily mean physical threats, but it can be, how we cross our arms as an instructor at the front of the class, or our voice. And we don't know this ahead of time necessarily, but it does impact, and then it affects their bandwidth to take in new information. And so executive function skills can be caused because of impact from trauma or part of the ADHD family. And what makes them so important is that they're the skills that affect how any student pays attention, or how any of us in life pay attention, how we organize and plan, how we initiate tasks or stay focused or regulate our emotions. So for me, I have forever been a list maker. I have a notebook for my day job and a notebook for my other job. And I love checking things off of lists, and I am one of those people that ends up doing something that wasn't on the list, and I still put it on the list and check it off. And I know it's a control thing too, I believe, but it makes me feel good that it's like, and I can see what I have to do. And when I know what I have to do, I'll sleep better at night and I'll function better during the day. And that's what works for me. So yes, if their executive functioning skills are impacted, it's going to impact almost all areas of their learning, right? From processing what they hear, what they see, what they read, and then the biggie is following through on their tasks. It's hard to follow through when you've had difficulty processing it all. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of learners with AD, not ADHD, that's a typo, I apologize, ADHD diagnosis, have executive functioning weaknesses. It's just, they just go hand in hand. But there's hope. And we'll get to that. So it can affect their working memory, their acquisition of reading skills, which is super important. They might have difficulty with sounding out words. So by the time you're seeing them, they've got a cumulative effect of weak reading skills. They may have difficulty with words with multiple meanings. Like that just doesn't resonate with them. And they may struggle with focus because they're all over the map. They're not sure what's going on. This one I've always found interesting with my learners. So it may affect their reading in a passive voice. So if they read, Sophie pushed Kevin, that's the active voice. And then Kevin was pushed by Sophie is the passive voice. So if it was written that way and they read Kevin was pushed by Sophie, there's a good chance that they think that Kevin pushed Sophie. It doesn't resonate with them, that passive voice, the way an active one does. Because the active one is right on telling you, hey, it's Sophie who pushed Kevin. But now they're like, Kevin was pushed by Sophie. Oh, so, Kevin pushed Sophie. It's a brain thing, and it's long fascinated me since I learned about this stuff. We also see people with executive function weaknesses that they may struggle with decision making, simple stuff. Can see it in our colleagues or friends, family. It has a lot of impacts, and it's always kind of fascinated me how people that we may know, love, work with, if they are impacted by some sort of traumatic event, could be big or small, it doesn't matter. The impact's on them. It's not up to us to decide if should have had that kind of impact on them. It's their executive function skills that go first, where suddenly, they might be able to still get up and feed their dog and walk their dog, but the ability to organize themselves after that is really hard. And we see it also with burnout in people, right? Like suddenly the day-to-day stuff that we know so well is so difficult. They may have difficulty using logic. They have difficulty with problem solving in math. That's a whole other thing for them. It's one thing to see some numbers and do computation, but now you want me to read stuff about some problem with numbers and I've got to figure it out. That's a lot for them. And they may lack critical thinking skills for sure. So how can we help them? Step-by-step instructions. So as I've been talking already, breaking them down, getting them to repeat instructions, whatever we can do to make those connections in the brain, that's what we want to do. It's okay to let our learners know when a certain concept is important and tell them why, because they may have missed that point. For us, it makes sense. For them, they may have missed it. And establishing a routine. and helping them to understand and follow the routine. So an example for me was working with a student, and we were doing math, meeting online. This person had some executive functioning skills, ADHD, but also some impact from trauma as a child. And so when we would start the session, I would say, here's what we're going to do today or tonight, whatever. And, we're going to work on this, then we're going to do this, we're going to review. And so they could see right away. And then I would pull up a worksheet. And and they could see that there were like 8 math questions. And I say, you know what? Let's just start with the first row and do 4. And these were often review questions because I wanted to build their self-esteem with it. Math was so hard for them. So they would do the first 4 and do well and feel good. And I'm like, should we try the next 4? Yes. And so we do the next 4. We often did 12 questions. And I was letting them drive the bus, not me, and they felt good. So then it's like, okay, so we did that part. Remember, I told you now the next thing we're going to do is this. And so now we're moving into that where they're feeling more confident because math is so horrible for them. And so far, so good. And they don't have to be, their brain doesn't have to be scanning, looking for that thing that's going to knock them over. And they know what's coming next. Being able to give our learners an idea of what we've got going in our class or the session that you're working on is really helpful to them. And if they can see it up on a board and go, okay, it's kind of like seeing an agenda in a meeting, and I sit here and cross things off as we go through them because I know that we're working our way through them. And for them, it just relieves pressure for them, which is so important. If possible, give a short review before you introduce those new concepts. This is useful if you're someone who is teaching phonics or reading skills, math and science. Checking in frequently with the learner to make sure they understand that concept and lesson, breaking the information assignments into chunks, and good old highlighting key words. Those are all very helpful to them in the same way it would have been helpful to learners who may have been dealing with the other cognitive skills deficits. Giving directions and assignments out loud. It's okay to have them repeat it. Creating to-do lists. My learners quite like that. In fact, in one class, they would take that to-do list of what we were going to do that morning and check it off the way I would check things off in a meeting. If we can keep written directions simple, checklists are great. Mind maps and graphic organizers, and even the KWL chart. It's 3 columns. The K is what I know about this topic, what I want to know, and what did I learn. And that helps for them to see their learning in one nice document. We would use bullet points, no fancy sentences or paragraphs, just simple stuff so they can refer to it. And it becomes a habit for them. So I know I feel like I talked too long on that one, but if you want to go to Canva Live, why is it not showing everything here? You're supposed to be able to see, oh, my bad. If you have a minute or 30 seconds to go to Canva Live and let me know, is there a cognitive skill that you're seeing your learners struggle with? Is it like what's popping out most for you in your class? Maybe there's none, which is awesome. But I'm just curious to know. So if you go to Canva Live and enter that code, the 3YWGFPP3, your answers will pop right up here. And I'm hoping somebody will try it. Because I am very curious to see what it's looking like in the classrooms out there. And I don't know why it's not showing me stuff. It's supposed to. Oh. Come on, Kendra. I just did this last night with someone and it worked fine. So I see there's some coming up there, and for some reason it's not letting me see them.
What if you hit copy invitation and put that in the chat? And
Maybe.
then it might move you on. I don't know.
I don't know either. It's weird, eh? Because it worked last
I've not
night.
used it.
I've used it, and it's like, what? Where are you? No? Okay, I have to get out of here to put it in the chat. Um, that's so bizarre. That's the whole reason why I practiced it last night with someone, and their stuff came right up. So I'm not sure. There we go.
Oh,
Okay. So concentration. Yeah, Diana, I'm not surprised. Concentration is auditory, oral concentration. Yeah, and I think for our adult learners, yes, that would be pretty common, right? For a variety of reasons, whether they've been out of school for a while. Okay. Well, I know this hangs on to it for me. Um, so I will take a look at that. But so I hope that what I touched on in here, and there's lots of stuff in the Google Drive that Summer's going to share with you. So that if you're not a note taker, you've got something to refer to as well. Okay, so I will, oh, there's one with visual. Thinking many of our learners struggle with math. Yeah, math is a tough one. Um, yeah, so concentration. Yeah, I did find that with my learners too. And I would have some learners where we would work on, let's say, multiplication, and they'd get it, but I knew that this person had a weak memory stuff. And so we do wrap that up on a Thursday and come back to class on Monday. And it was like I'd never taught it before. So thank you for that. I don't want to take up too much of your time on that, but I was very interested to see where it was hitting for people. So we're going to talk about metacognition. Again, something I wish I knew about when I became a teacher. So I'm grateful for all the new stuff that's out there for us about this. So with metacognition, it's basically thinking about our own thinking processes. And when I said at the beginning of this session that, I was someone who, I'm just going to hide the meeting controls for a minute. There we go. I was someone who had to copy out a whole notebook to learn or to study. I didn't know that was a metacognition skill or that I was consciously thinking about my own thinking. I guess, somehow along the way realized that that worked for me. But when we can help, provide metacognition skills for our learners, it's really good because it can help enhance their learning, their problem solving, and all of those overarching cognitive processes. Because it can optimize their basic cognitive processes such as working memory, attention, the activation of prior knowledge, and task completion. Because if you can't activate prior knowledge, based on all I've talked about for the past almost hour, then it's really hard to move forward with any kind of concept, right? It's really important that we show them how to activate their prior knowledge. And there is a document in the Google Drive that does refer to that. So different strategies that I have found that work well. Planning. So again, sharing with your learners the importance of setting goals, creating a plan. And by that, I don't mean the stuff I don't know what your government asks you to do, but I know what ours does. I don't necessarily mean that document that we have to do for our funders, but more low-key, smaller goal setting and creating a plan. Perhaps it's as simple as I need to pass grade 10 math so I can get into this program. That's an awesome goal. Now let's do a plan. That plan might include going back to grade 8 math to get it done because there's probably a gap there, that type of thing. When you can monitor and encourage them to now monitor their understanding. So if we think back to retelling, instructions, or something from a passage that was read, or something else that you're discussing. And that helps them think about, maybe a peer will say something about what you were working on, and they may go, oh, I didn't know that was in there. And that's okay, because now they're going, oh, I missed that. Maybe that's something from my notebook, or maybe I need to ask Trish what that was. How did I miss it? But it gets that brain firing, and they're becoming more aware of, okay, so that was in the second paragraph. I missed that. How did I miss that? Guide them on how to assess their own learning and adjust their strategies. And that's where, again, if we can model metacognition, where we're sharing our thought process with those think alouds. Again, I find math really easy to do with think aloud. I teach a lot of phonics and other elements of structured reading to adults and kids, and think alouds work really well, right? Where I'm explicitly telling them what this word is, or how this sounds, or how these letters sound together, or how we work out a multiplication problem. And when they can see it and they can hear it, and hopefully they can manipulate stuff if they're in person and they can do it. All of those things help with think alouds. Concept mapping, like metacognitive tools like concept mapping, journaling, reflective writing, sketching. As I said before, I had some learners who really thrived with their note-taking sketching. I'm not an artist, and my sketches are pretty basic, but for them it worked well. Audio recordings, sharing reflections with peers, the KWL charts, the story maps, all of those work so well. To give you an idea of my sketching abilities, when I taught grade 1 and I was writing on the board or drawing something to match a word I was teaching them, they said to me, "That's okay, Miss Derby, you're trying your best." So I stopped doing that, because clearly I wasn't helping, and I, would print off pictures of things that I wanted them to know. But I think about that often when I read this as a metacognitive tool, because me sketching isn't going to work, but it does work for a lot of our learners. Even, we've worked with learners where they almost create their own little graphic novel about a concept that they've learned. And it's so cool. And it's a good reminder of, having some text with an image is so good. And they get, and again, it's a bit of a support. I'll come back to that carburetor. There's a picture of a carburetor. That word carburetor is going to be on the paper. There's a connection when I see a word that starts with, CAR. Trish showed me how to break it down, that kind of thing. All of those tools really help them. Offer support to our learners as they learn more about their cognitive skills. Let's celebrate their improvement and adapt strategies that work well for your learners. And I imagine most of you are probably already doing this. This is more of a case of just being more explicit or systematic in doing this for them. Think alouds, you've heard me say that too many times today, but again, encouraging our learners to pause and verbalize their thought process. And it's a tough one, right? We're trying to get through some curriculum. We know we've got some pressure on. Maybe people are getting ready to write the cake. It's already the end of March and got stuff to do. But if we can find a way to slow ourselves down when we can, and then, get them to do the think aloud with you, or through organized group work. Because I know not all adult learners want to speak out in front of the group, and that's okay too. And whenever we can model the strategy of think alouds, that we're showing them how it works. And if it's hard for us to show them, maybe there's a video on YouTube that will work. And then, and again, you can show 5 minutes of the video, talk about it. Okay, let's see what happens in the next 5 minutes, that type of thing. Self-questioning. So getting them used to saying, what's the main idea? What's happening in this story? What did the character do? And those are good questions for, if they're reading fiction or nonfiction. But even if it's the simple, what's happening? What's this document Trish just gave us to read? Like, what is it? And maybe they have to break it down again in chunks. So encouraging our learners to make inferences based on the title of the passage or the illustration, because inferential comprehension, that skill is quite a sophisticated comprehension skill, right? Where they can look at something and make a prediction or an inference. They may not have that ability, but if we get them into the habit of, hey, this is what we're going to be doing today, this is the picture, what do you think that's about? Or what do you think is going to happen? Getting them used to having that thought process. So even if it's a document again on plumbing, I'm working on a student workbook on plumbing for adult learners. That's why I keep bringing it up, not because I'm a plumber. And again, just chunking that, right? Giving them pieces of it. Let's talk about it. What's that first paragraph? What do we have to do? And get them used to that they can then reflect on what they're reading or what they're doing. So teaching them how to summarize, whether it's in their own words or illustrations. Again, you can do it after reading a book or passages or even a math problem. And getting them to evaluate where were they stuck on that math problem? What can we do? Let's try another one and see if we can do it a little bit differently. Getting them to summarize, again, that reinforces the active comprehension, and it helps them to eventually identify gaps in their understanding. So if we go paragraph by paragraph in, let's say, my plumbing document, they may realize that when they read or listened to me read paragraph 2, for whatever reason, it didn't land. So now we can go back and figure that that's where we missed the piece. Okay, let's go back and reread it or talk about it or write about it. And what kind of things can we do differently to better understand the task that they had? So visualization, getting them used to, to picture scenes or concepts as they read. Provide visual aids to help them. You can start with that so that they get used to it. But we want to strengthen those comprehension and retention skills back to the brain. And getting to visualize out loud. So, right, that's the good old think alouds. They're verbalizing, but they're visualizing at the same time. And it's not an easy skill to do. As I said, I did it with a group of practitioners, and we all struggled with it. Even though everyone was capable of doing the task, suddenly having to put all those steps verbalized was a different thing. But it's a good skill to learn. Check back strategy. I love that one. Show learners to check each part of a math problem as they complete it. Or check back to see if they understand the instructions. Check back that they've noted or highlighted the important parts of their assignments. You can check back by asking them to tell you how they solved the problem or if they even understand the question. Check backing does what verbalizing does, the think alouds. It helps them retain what they're reading. Just by them saying, yeah, I did that part of the math equation. Yes, and you got the right answer. So you followed all the steps. See, we checked back to make sure that you did it. And it demonstrates to them that, okay, this is a strategy that works for me. Using prompts, when they're looking at something, a document or a passage or a math problem, what part's most clear to you? What part is the most difficult for you? And what could make this story or this sentence stronger? Like what are we missing that affected how, you understood it? So the sentence starters, another spelling mistake. Doesn't matter how many times you proofread it, your own stuff, you see spelling mistakes. And those really bother me. So those prompts, I really like the first two. What part was most clear to you? So even if we were looking at a set of instructions for a math problem, a more, multi-step math problem. So what part was most clear to you? Well, the beginning. Okay, so I wonder why that is. But what part was most difficult? Well, it was this part in the middle. I didn't know what they wanted me to do, and then I didn't understand the ending, which was the answer they were looking for. And that gives all of us a place to start with them. I was going to do Canva Live, but I know we're running out of time. And even though I have taken a lot of slides out that you will be able to see when you get this, but I wanted, I am curious, and maybe if you just want to pop it in the chat while I'm yakking, How often do you feel your learners reflect on their thinking? Like, do you think they have a chance to do it? Are you already providing metacognitive strategies? Because I know you have a lot on your plate. It's a lot to make happen. Um, but I put that question in there partly out of curiosity and hoping that if it's still something that you're working on, you can, try some of the strategies that I've provided today. UDL. Um, I had hoped that this would have taken off on a larger scale with educators than it has. I attended a UDL conference at the University of PEI, I think in 2016, maybe 2016, 2017. And I thought, ooh, we're going places with it. And it's there, but it's quiet. That's the framework who created that. I love this graphic because I, again, didn't know all of this stuff when I was first teaching, but how stuff is presented and how students can tell us the answer back, right? The different presentations, what a learning space looks like, minimizing unnecessary physical effort, instructional material, and that information is going back and forth is so important. Um, for all of the cognitive skills and metacognition skills. Simply put, UDL is providing multiple means of representation to give the learners various ways to take in information. So we're back to that whole take in information. So that's them seeing it on the board, hearing you talk about it. Maybe it's even in front of them. Maybe it's a YouTube video, but it's different ways for them to take it in. And hopefully because it's both verbal and written, those connections, better chance of the connections happening. And it also means, though, the different ways of letting them express or demonstrate what they know. And that is where, as a special ed resource teacher dealing with classroom teachers, it was often a struggle because some people felt that modifications were cheating. I'm not sure how we got there, but that's where they landed often. And they're not. I had a student who couldn't have written a sentence. He was in grade 8, brilliant. I could have read him literally War and Peace, and he would be able to talk about it, retell it. He could not write a sentence about it, but he got it. And so UDL is so important when we give our learners different ways to express. Where it gets challenging is when they're asked to sit and write an exam, right? Because the cake doesn't, I don't think, has a whole lot of different alternatives. But if we can support them through their journey of studying to take the cake, that they have, different strategies of breaking down words that they don't know, looking back at the instructions. It's okay to do that even in the cake, that can help them because they will be restricted in how they demonstrate what they know. But we can help them practice with that. And then providing multiple means of engagement to tap into their interests. All of us do better when we're interested in what we're watching or listening to. And with our adult learners, we really want to find ways to motivate them to learn. So the goal really is to increase access to learning by reducing physical, cognitive, intellectual, and organizational barriers. And for most of us in the classroom, it's those cognitive and intellectual ones, right? So the connection between UDL and supporting our learners, when we use the strategies to support our learners, the ones we've been talking about, we are reducing the cognitive barriers to learning, and we are looking at ways to help them acquire the information differently. Seeing it, hearing it, writing it, all of that is important. And then we give them the alternatives to express it, which is why you've heard me talk about let them sketch in their notebook, let them highlight, jot down little notes, do whatever works for them to help. And because it's motivating for them when they realize that they know if they're not a good reader or a good writer, but suddenly you're saying, you know what, draw me a diagram of what we just talked about or what we learned. And probably for the first time in their long academic journey, someone has said to them, yeah, that's it, you got it. And it didn't involve writing a paragraph because that's not their thing. And we can, deal with the paragraph writing later. But the fact that in the moment in the class, they're suddenly a bit more motivated because you're okay with taking the information that way. Oh, I thought I hid this slide. I'm not going to go through multisensory because it's there for you, and there's stuff in the Google Drive. Because for me, multisensory is all part of UDL and all the other strategies I've talked about. I did hide these slides in my other version, so that's why, and I apologize for that. Although, let's stop. Oh, no, I didn't. This is the diagram that I love too, right? So multisensory, coming at them, auditory, visual, kinesthetic. I love this graphic because I think it does a great job of, visual. I'm going to do pictures and structures and a map, and kinesthetic is working through something. So maybe it's having manipulatives on the table to learn how to multiply with math. That's what we did. And division, we pretended things were cookies that we'd put on a plate so that we could, because food was always good. Marking things off, those checklists, highlighting, compiling, getting them to talk through things, reading through things, listening to it. This is my all-time favorite. For you, it's not about adding activities. I like to think it's about adding pathways, right? That you're using more senses whenever you can. And, we're human. We're not going to be able to do it for everything that we're doing. But when we can, it means we're helping our learners engage, recall, and apply what they learn, and without more planning time on your part. And it does become more natural that when you're going to do a lesson on plumbing, you've already got stuff set up that's going on the board or, on slides, a cheat sheet for your learner, and, the stuff that you're going to talk about. That is just all part of it, but it's really pathways for them. So it didn't. This is the whole thing about when information is experienced, not just explained. So I will pop through these ones because I want to get to scaffolding. Good job, Trish. There's scaffolding.
While you're moving through, Trish, I just wanted to point out that we are at 3:28 p.m. and we are scheduled to go till 3:30. So we may need to provide some of this information as resources to our participants in that Google Drive. Okay.
And it is in there, in the Google Drive. And in 2 minutes or less, I can talk about scaffolding. It is beneficial to the learners because it does provide that support. It builds confidence, which is something I've been speaking about, and it supports their differentiation, right? So I do a lot of scaffolding when it comes to our adult learners. It's as simple as vocabulary, having them look through, again, you have that text that we're going to take a look at, and I've already trained them on, let's look for words that we don't recognize, or that are long, or maybe they're more than 2 syllables. And they would get in the habit of doing that scan. And then one by one, we would start working through the words. So before we've even read something, we're looking at it and we're scanning it. And then I could help them with the actual vocabulary that they've identified. And what I love about this is with adults, as I mentioned way back an hour and a half ago, many of them come with that vocabulary here, just not here. And so it's when they can now see the word and know what it means. It's that kind of thing. So I apologize that I'm rushing through the last few slides. I get so excited when I do this. I could take up the rest of your afternoon, but I'm sure you're all ready to go home and call it a day. But these are some of the things that scaffolding is great for. And I love it for the adults, again, because it makes their learning feel achievable, that they're seeing results. And it fits in with metacognition. It addresses the cognitive overload. So we're not dumping all that new information. We're trying to give it to them in pieces and scaffold it for them. Charts, checklists, visual support, all the things that I've been talking about. And this is where I had hoped that I could bring it all together for you. That, we started out with the stuff and now we're ending here. Explicit instruction. I've got a great article that was summarized with some strategies for you in the Google Drive. The whole I do, then we do it together as a guided practice. Then we start heading them on their way to independent practice and hopefully real world tasks. This, and again, you'll have a copy of this presentation so you can look through it at your own, but you can see what each approach supports. And this is the stuff I think we're always aiming for with our adult learners. Building the confidence and helping them with the problem-solving skills, apply learning in real-world contexts. And there we go. So resource guides, again, I've given the link to Summer, and I think there's 9 documents in there for your reading pleasure, but hopefully that you will find them valuable. And there is a copy of the presentation in there too. I am always happy to, answer questions. You can email me anytime, and I am happy to have a chat. And I know there's probably stuff in the chat, if there is or not.
Why don't I just summarize for you so that you don't have to kind of dig through it. First of all, when you asked a question earlier, one of the comments that came in was a note that one of the attendees was feeling as though their learners are so focused to getting to their end goal that they forget to slow down and reflect on what they're learning and how it connects. So it is something that they plan on encouraging immediately. One of our other attendees invited everyone to click a link to share a Canva collection of thinking routines that they came across. It's a fantastic library of visual scaffolds.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. And then we have several thank yous.
Well, that's so nice. You're right. Adult learners, they do tend to be on, like they come in with their goals, right? There's employment, skilled trades, whatever. And and I get it. That's where they see it. So yeah, if we can, very systematically guide them and still show them that they'll get there. But here are some tools that will help. So I would like this.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I really enjoyed the opportunity to do this. And again, I apologize that even though I cut out slides, it was still too long. But yes, I'm happy. My email address is in there, and I really appreciate your time today. I know it's the end of a teaching day, and so thank you. And thank you, Summer, for the invitation. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Well, I would like to join everybody in the chat who's putting in their thanks to you by thanking you for sharing so much valuable information with us today. I am very confident that everyone who attended today's session recognized some of those learning concentration, comprehension challenges,
right
from learners directly in their own programs. And I know they'll benefit both from the tips you shared live, as well as from the resource package that you've put together for them. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, every time I would do the long version of the cognitive skills, people would say, where were you when my son was struggling in school? Because we do recognize ourselves in that, right? So it's interesting. But yes, again, thank you for your time, and it's been a real pleasure. And I'm here if anybody's interested in more. I'm happy to do it.
Wonderful. Thank you.